just to set the scene a little bit while the panelists are swapping over, must have been about 12 months ago we planned, and then COVID meant we could do it in February with Bristow's, a discussion that Claire Smith chaired around how the deal structures are between AI and data companies with pharma. And I think the key to it was, were the deal structures still fit for purpose? Because you were basing it on the traditional milestone, upfront milestones product, but actually you needed the AI and machine learning algorithms as a means to be able to do the R&D, but you need the data from pharma. So Claire moderated that day, and I'm delighted that Bristow's have supported us to do this panel here today, which Victoria English is going to moderate. Just looking at whether, we're creating value. We just heard on the last panel about how we're using diversity and creating value in different ways. But actually, when it comes to the deals that are being done, and all the stakeholders, whether that's regulators, patients, investors, companies, large and small, all the stakeholders have to benefit here. So I'm going to hand over to Victoria, and I'm sure some of what we discussed way back in February with Claire is going to come back into how these deals and how the value is being shared amongst those stakeholders in its broadest sense. So Victoria, over to you.
Good afternoon. We've had quite a good introduction to the subject that we're going to discuss today through the previous panel. We've changed the scope a little bit to narrow it down to artificial intelligence, looking at value creation from artificial intelligence, looking at artificial intelligence as a tool, and looking at it as a product, which is something that's coming up quite quickly. So my name is Victoria English. I'm editor of the publication MedNows. And from there, I will pass you on to our panelists, who will introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their experience. Yep.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bradley Hardiman. I head up the European Search and Evaluation team for Astellas Pharmaceuticals in Europe. We're based in Cambridge. We search for anything and everything that a global pharma company is interested in. So it's collaborations with universities and biotechs, VC investing, in and out licensing, and M&A. Two things. One is I'm a last-minute substitution for Nuno, so I've not had much conversation with the panel or Victoria. So if I go off-piste, I apologise to Victoria in advance. And secondly, you'll meet Hannah from PharmEnable. I'm a shareholder in PharmEnable, so I do have a conflict of interest. So you should treat anything I say about that fantastic company with a high degree of skepticism. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Claire Smith. I'm a partner at Bristow's law firm. We have focused for many years heavily on a full service offering to clients working in both the tech and the life sciences sectors, and now, of course, increasingly on the overlap and the intersect between those two sectors, where this is really exciting times. I work particularly, my specialism is on life sciences deals and transactions, particularly in the partnering and collaboration space. I think hopefully I'll provide some interesting comments on the things I'm hearing and seeing from stakeholders who are trying to do deals in this sector, and how AI is shaping these deals, and what value is being created and how people are proposing to share that value. I get a lot of questions about what's market standard. I think there are no spoiler alerts, but I don't think there is a market standard, but we are seeing some themes coming through, so I'm happy to comment on those as the talk goes on.
And hi everyone, I'm Chris Wayman, 15 years in Pfizer. I now work for Ernst & Young. My role in EY is to help clients realise the value of the data that they hold, whether that value is in terms of commercial value, economic value, in other words, what is it worth to patients if you come up with an invention, or what is the fair market value in terms of how much should you be paying or selling your data for.
Brilliant. Hi. Yes, so I'm Hannah. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of PharmEnable. We're an AI drug discovery company. We're all about creating the next generation of small molecule drugs. So we believe that small molecules are a very, very powerful modality. And so we're looking to create small molecules that are more complex and three-dimensional, so have some of the properties of maybe a biologic, but in a powerful small molecule form. So that's where I am now. I think for this panel discussion, it's also relevant in terms of my background. So I have over 20 years experience in healthcare and drug discovery at Millennium Pharmaceuticals and at Aztecs. Also worked on maybe on the dark side in consulting. When I worked as a consultant, I worked across a number of different companies. So working with executives in big pharma, but also diagnostics and big data. So that was at the early stages there. And that's what led me, obviously, to go ahead and start up Farm Enable. So I think hopefully we'll have some interesting discussions today.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Peter Pumans. I'm CTO Health at an organization called IMEC, which is a non-profit organization located in Belgium. We're quite influential in what you could call silicon tech, nanotech, deep tech space, where we help the industry tackle grand challenges. So to some extent, our DNA is all over the devices I see actually floating around, the devices we use every day. And so the reason I'm here is because we're really interested in leveraging our know-how, also our infrastructure, our ability to put atoms together in a way that you exactly like, and our ecosystem actually to enable new tools to understand biology. Just peel away the layers of the onion and understand biology so much more deeply. AI is an important piece of this. It's by no means the only piece. For us, it's just one of the layers in the solutions that need to be developed. The lack of good data has come up before, so we're also really interested in how might you build the tools to actually generate the data that could feed then better AI models. And also, if these AI models get bigger and larger, how do you continue to execute them cost effectively? So many interests. Thanks.
Good. I think it might be interesting to go back to David Roblin's comments earlier, in which he said there's a sea of data and a thirst for knowledge. And this concept was repeated in the panel that we just heard. And so I'd like to start with Hannah and ask her how she defines AI-enabled drug discovery. In other words, what is the AI bringing of value to the drug discovery process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI. I mean, it's like the biggest buzzword I think you can get. We have to be very careful of that. Obviously, with my background in drug discovery, I know how difficult it is to develop drugs, and so I think where AI comes in, it's a tool in order to help brilliant scientists to make better decisions. So I don't think it's something. I know that people were initially concerned. Are we going to basically get rid of all scientists? I don't see that as being the case. It's more a tool to enable that. So I'm not one of the sort of AI people that believe that you'll put a problem into a computer and out will spit a drug. That is we're a long way, and that's certainly not my belief. But I think it will be very beneficial in terms of what we're actually doing. So where do I see it having a big impact? I think from the last panel discussion, I think everybody could hear that obviously in biology, there's a big need in terms of the impact it can have there. Our expertise at Farm Enable is all in the chemistry. So in order to come up with a good small molecule drug in particular, you need to have the right biological target that's going to have the therapeutic effect. But then you also need to have the right small molecule and then the right patient population. So those are the three sort of key factors for us. Obviously, that's not my expertise in terms of the other two, so I will speak mainly on the chemistry side. And that's, again, a very vast problem. Small molecules, there's a very, very large concept. There's basically the number of small molecule possibilities out there is more than the grains of sand in the world, so more than the stars in the universe. So it's a very large concept. So our first thing was to understand what actually is chemical space, to then be able to know where to populate it. And then that's sort of, where we've then been able to take that forward. And then be able to generate complex three-dimensional small molecules from that, and then to filter that down and narrow that down. So yeah.
So at your stage of the company, which is preclinical
Early.
discovery, early, what would you say the main outputs are or have been thus far?
Yeah, I think in AI, it's one of those things you need to actually validate and show that you can actually do what you say you can do. So one of the main things for us was being able to take complex problems, certainly ones that no one else had been able to solve, actually go through that, come up with novel molecules, synthesize them, and then find really exciting, promising starting points that we've then been able to modify and take forward into discovery and later stages.
Yeah. Claire, I'm wondering if we could move to you, because we're talking now about output value generated by the algorithms that have been in use here. Have any of these sorts of things come up in your discussions, or do you not deal with preclinical?
Oh no, we do
assets?
with the whole of the
Okay.
drug life cycle. So
Yeah.
yes, this comes up a lot, and actually it's interesting what you're saying, because we see, to your point, Hannah, about that AI is banded around a lot. It's a really exciting. Machine learning and all these technologies are very exciting. And I think there is a sort of a bit of a danger, a bit of a hype, and we're seeing in the market sort of a range of different deals and how people value things. And there is a sort of a perception that, if AI is involved, there's lots of things in the headlines of sort of big dollars and things like that. But actually, in reality, if you're starting out in the clinic, in the clinical stage, and all the drug discovery stage, is that you need that sort of something validated in the clinic or validated in vitro, rather than the move from the in silico to the wet labs to sort of have some proof of concept, so that when you're actually then looking for those strategic partnerships, that is valued by your potential partner.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you've got that close-knit collaboration and a very close working collaboration with, whether it be big pharma or what you might be working closely with, for example, an academic or research institution who's sitting on a lot of very valuable data, you're looking to have those so what people have seen as the mecca are these outcome fees-based arrangements where you're tapping into milestones and royalties and things like that, is to have that sort of that moving from the sort of the in silico to the dry lab to the wet lab, and have something validated to actually kick off with these collaborations and the partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of the starting point, and then there's probably another conversation sort of touching on some of the panel discussion before about all the different outputs that come from AI.
Mm-hmm.
So I think traditionally people were looking at small molecules, or a molecule, the drug company was focusing on a molecule coming out of it. You might have a partner who has a platform technology. Now, the power of AI and the power of data together, it's blurring what a product is from a collaboration. Actually, you have so much in between, because you have the insights that are generated, the biomarkers that might be discovered, the target, the potential for genetic tests and diagnostics and everything else. And actually, there's a lot of value, extra value, and often unpredictable value that can come out of these collaborations, and actually having to sort out between partners then who takes that forward, and who compensates who for that value.
So I see things slightly differently.
Yeah.
In that when you talk about value there, you talk about value to the clinical AI company or the owner of the data. What you rarely see is the value being captured that is being provided back to the patient, and also the value that is associated with the data owner. So, for example, I've been working with an NHS Foundation Trust. They provide their data to a university. The university does innovation, comes up with, validates algorithms, spins these out of the university, raises money, yet none of the value goes back to the NHS Trust, who actually generated the data. And so when you're thinking around value, it's really, really important, and this is part of the NHS's principles, that the NHS should be receiving a fair and equitable share of any value generated. And so as we're talking around algorithms that are being used to identify new drugs, we talk about royalties, we talk about milestones, but we very rarely talk about the equity or the value going back to the owners of the data in the first place.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Bradley, whether there's something you might like to, as the skeptic perhaps here.
Well, just to pick up on that point,
Yeah.
if the university is spinning out a company based on NHS data, then the NHS should be getting a share of that company, and that's what that's the value that they get. But once that company then takes it forward and does a deal with pharma, actually, I'm again being a cynic, I'm not sure pharma really care about how that target was come up with and how that new chemical entity was generated. It's just we'll judge it based on that and on our opinions, and then we'll do the deal. So the value for pharma of AI at that stage in that collaboration is almost minimal. What is good is that you'll come up with more and more and more, and if your AI system is any good, you'll come up with very high quality new chemical entities that will make it into the clinic and into the market, generate value, and you'll do that more and more.
And does this, this include more indications for against a single target, or this came up in some of the panel discussions earlier today, that you can generate more discovery based around a single investigation? Maybe not.
Yeah, again, because it's just utterly dependent on what that compound does and
Yeah.
what the target is, and
Yeah.
then the new indications will come out later.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, not convinced yet that the AI-generated new chemical entities or targets are any better or worse than 15 years of academic research coming up with a target. You can just generate more and quicker. What remains to be seen is how good they are. And I watch with interest.
I think,
on that.
sorry, no.
I was going to say, I think we've seen a good example in the last couple of days, but maybe where AI is struggling with diversity, in that I think the Google algorithm has effectively diagnosed kidney disease in men, but has struggled to diagnose it in women.
Sure. But that comes back to the quality of your data.
Yes.
And all AI systems, all machine learning, all algorithms is down to the quality of the data.
So
I
we'll
mean, I
get to,
think,
go on.
sorry,
Yeah.
I'll let
No,
them
go
speak, but we've acted quite a few sort of research institutions and non-profit bodies who are sitting on data who, like the NHS, have struggled with when they're working with AI companies to get value recognition for that data. I think the nervousness on the side of the AI company is that because they could be getting data from lots of disparate sources, is how many royalties do you pay to how many people, because it has to be manageable. And if you've got a whole wide set of data sets, all supplemented, and you're integrating lots of data sets, and you're paying for all those data sets, and then the products and the services that could come out of it are unpredictable and several steps down the line, it's sort of, there's that nervousness that you could be, it could be uncontrollable about how much you're actually going to be having to be paying out and whether it's going to be profitable. So there's always going to be that nervousness, and it's interesting about, how they say data's the new oil, but actually it's not as easily valued as crude oil.
Yes, you didn't say snake oil, yeah.
I think the data itself has very little value.
Yeah.
It's actually the insights that come
Yes.
out of the data
Yeah,
is where
that's
the
right.
value is.
Peter, is there something you'd like to jump in and say at this point?
Well, so we have strong opinions about the data that goes into AI systems, and we think it's incomplete, and that you're basically recording, in many cases, not always of course, but in many cases you're recording noise and trying to reconstruct reality from the noise. And so we think there's still a lot to be done in terms of enabling the data capture that goes one or maybe more layers deeply. So you can record real signals, and you can come up with AI decision systems that really that are really based on the underlying biology as opposed to on some higher level signals. So we're always advocating. I don't think we're there yet. AI is beautiful, and we're going to need it. It's a tool, but there's just so much. We have to dig so much deeper into the biology before we're ready to use AI systems.
So if we could return to the question of data. So I think of this, I'm not a farmer, but I pretend to be a farmer, and I think, well, there's no food unless there's soil. And so I think of data as being the soil. And you have to look at the soil from different perspectives, the season, the amount of water, whatever. But the data, sources of data are very important here. and they're very diverse. And I wondered whether, Chris, you could start by giving us some ideas to the types of sources that are available to a biotech company or to a pharma company. They have to start with patient data, if I've got that right. And what are the different sources of patient data? And more importantly, who owns it? Who gets rights to it? How is it protected? You know, these are all things that have to be considered.
And I think that's a huge question.
Yeah.
I think the power of an algorithm is only as good as the data that validates it, or is trained on, and then it's validated.
Yeah.
The sources of the data are incredibly disparate, siloed, and of dubious quality, some of them. I think so for example, let's take the UK. You can get HES data, SUS data from NHS Digital. It's a very top level. And for those of you in the room that have got this data from the NHS, you will often find that the data fields change month on month. So it actually then makes it very hard to do analytics. But I think where the real value is thinking around what is the research question you want to pose? And that is whether that's an algorithm or whether it's normal analytics to just unlock normal value. You need to be thinking around where's the primary care data, because actually primary care data actually contains more value than hospital data, hospital episodes. So in the UK, CPRD, for example, is a very good source of GP data. Secondary care data, you can either go directly to hospitals or you can go to NHS Digital and ultimately get data. It is what I would call as a reasonable fair market value. Once you start going to private providers of data, the price goes up significantly and the quality doesn't necessarily follow. I think there are other data sources that people should now be looking to for validation of algorithms. PROMs, so patient-reported outcomes. So we're working with a triage system at the moment to reduce GPs' queues down. And actually we're finding that the data that patients report in the questionnaires as they're waiting to go to their GPs, once you align an algorithm over the top, you can identify early signs of many diseases. Dental data is something that people don't ever think about. You know, yet if you think about it, the number of fillings you have, your oral health, is probably actually one of the best predictors of your health.
The microbiome of the mouth, yeah.
Exactly. And of course then the genomic data and how you actually unlock value from genomic data is proving incredibly tough. But I guess what is really important is that this data is owned by the data owners.
So the hospital.
The hospitals, or ultimately the patient, the GP.
Yeah.
And it's when you then analyse this data that this is where the value chain starts to build. Because as you start to link the data sets, curate the data sets, the value builds. The value isn't in the data, the raw data. As I said, the value is actually in the insights that you generate from the data. And it's trying to understand what that value is in terms of validation of an algorithm and the commercial potential, using that algorithm to risk stratify patients going into hospitals in terms of economic value. But of course then as well, how much should you be paying for the data in terms of fair market value?
And that's where Claire comes in, because that must be coming into your discussions.
It comes into deals all the time,
Yeah.
and people are, you know, could do with sort of financial expert advice as opposed to legal advice on that, because you know what the commercial value of data is very hard, and I think they're struggling.
Yeah.
And I think they, you know, use traditional mechanisms like sort of royalty deals, saying, oh well, if this is a significant slug of data that's really going to get my business going, I will pay them a royalty because it's probably going to translate into any product I actually end up producing or developing, and I'll pay hopefully a manageable low royalty that, you know, and I'll, you know, wait and see kind of thing. But it's a very rough and ready kind of.
Go on.
Okay, in your experience, how many, if they've got it utterly wrong at the negotiation point, how easy is it to renegotiate that agreement?
It's quite tough unless
Yeah.
something else comes along. So, for example, if you have a small biotech company negotiating something and then they get taken over by or flip it on to big pharma when there's some big dollar signs and there's some other quid pro quo to get something else in return for renegotiating some of these deals. Sometimes that happens, but I suppose we're in the very early stage of some of these deals, right? So, time will only tell.
But we've even seen with companies that have gone through the IPO process where value has been left on the table because they don't recognise the value.
Yeah.
So we worked with a diagnostic company that went through IPO. The market cap was around $80 million. When we looked at the value of the data in terms of the commercial use of the data, how much money could you generate from the data, it actually turned out that they'd left about 100 billion on the table in company value. Clearly that value has now been used to raise more money to unlock that value.
Yeah.
But it's really worth considering data is often an unrealised asset on the balance sheet of companies.
Yeah, this brings us let's go back to the drawing board, which is source of data. So you have the public databases, the UK Biobank, but then you have data aggregators, companies like BC Platforms of Switzerland, which aggregate on behalf of their customers and of course charge a fee for access. Do we have essentially a market in data which is sort of ad hoc? I mean, what is the situation?
So I think we've missed out a huge slug of data. So I think we've covered nicely, we've got a lot of clinical data, but scientists around the world are generating enormous amounts of data that goes into publications. And that is obviously, again, very valuable sources of data. And who owns that data? I think that's a really interesting one. And I know certainly publishing houses and journals looking at how they can best monopolize that really valuable data they're generating. And then obviously the other source of data is in-house data, and obviously big pharma generating huge amounts of data there as well, and obviously that's less easily accessible. So I think there's a number of different, and then in the earlier stages, certainly in the drug discovery, there's a lot of data. I think as soon as you start to get into the sort of in vivo, the different types of models and everything have a huge thing to play, and trying to look across and to use, that's really challenging. There's a severe lack of data in that's easily accessible or something.
Let me just move, if I can, up one level. Maybe up is not the right word, maybe further out is the right word, and that's regulatory. Because at a certain point, the data has to be validated to suit, or not suit, but to meet the requirements of the regulator. The regulators, at least the European Medicines Agency, in the past 18 months has been taking very seriously this idea of combining real-world data in the decision-making process and helping guide companies in designing their clinical trials using real-world data just as an option, or as not an alternative to the randomized control trial, but just as an additional piece of information, particularly if there's a safety issue in respect to a type of medicine, like JAK inhibitors, for example. And so you've got the real-world data, which is coming into play into the regulatory process, and probably that will systematize maybe the collection. Maybe it'll systematize the sources a little bit, help validate the sources. I don't know what you think about this, whether you've had any experience with real-world data.
I mean, we're not quite at the clinical
At
stage.
the clinical stage, yeah. The regulatory stage, yeah.
But no, we're already looking at that. I think, for us, obviously looking at biomarkers and what sort of data we're able to generate, and real-world data is going to be absolutely essential for being able to monitor the effects and the success of the drugs that we're developing. So, I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to come in.
Chris, maybe?
I was going to say something that may sound random, but I think could be important. So, just thinking about modern cars, for example.
Say that again, please.
Modern cars. Modern cars actually.
Oh, modern cars.
Yeah, they will monitor the driver and maybe other passengers as well.
Right.
All the time, because there's a certain liability associated with the driver being in the car. But there's a lot of data coming from the driver, the behavior of the driver, the response to situations, and there's nobody, as far as I know, is talking about, hey, let's use the data as a data set to say something about mental health, mental agility. So there's so many untapped data sources, and we have 3 barriers to actually use them. One is just the plumbing isn't there, the data just doesn't flow. It's complicated to get data to flow because of the structure isn't right, it's not annotated and so on. There's a regulatory barrier. There's GDPR compliance, and then later on, if you want to use it, is of course healthcare regulations. I guess those are the challenges that we haven't solved. And is there something to be said about solving these challenges pre-competitively? We're always big on, okay, if there's a big challenge in the field, let's solve it pre-competitively. Develop a platform that allows you to do things in a way that is privacy preserving, that ensures it's GDPR compliant, that ensures that whoever generates the data gets some fair compensation for the data. Can such a platform be built? And we haven't seen those initiatives.
And those would have to be collaborations.
Of course.
Yeah. Chris, sorry.
And for those of us that use real-world data, the biggest challenge is actually accessing it in a timely manner. I know my last request, I think, to one of the NHS trusts took between 6 and 9 months to get through the IG Caldecott process. So there's a novel use for machine learning, AI, that we're seeing now being evolved, which is a way of allowing researchers to get to data quicker. This is where you create synthetic data from the real-world data. So ultimately, you are providing a population that has all the attributes of the original data set, the patient data set, but with none of with a lot less of the privacy issues that are associated with that. And it is on these synthetic data sets now that we're starting to see algorithms being trained, disease understanding being improved, risk stratification models being built. And it'd be interesting to hear the views of the panel, especially from a pharma perspective. What is the thinking around sort of synthetic data, which in a way is a patient avatar?
Yeah, but it comes down to the sample set that then you build the synthetic set. All AI systems kind of amplify our biases. And that's a big issue with them. So if there's just an inherent bias, either from the collection or the data set that you've chosen yourself, that just gets amplified. So I'll come back with a question of you. How has that panned out? In has the quality of that synthetic data stood up to muster?
I guess there's one example where there's one product that's gone through the regulatory process and has been approved, a Roche product.
Which one is that? Can't
It
remember.
begins with an A.
Oh, okay.
That's about as far as I'm going to go with that. Something unpronounceable. But what we are seeing, and we're working actually with a non-UK country that basically has a national data set. So
Sweden.
That's not Sweden. all the primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, population genomic data is all linked together, and they're trying to speed up the access to this to drive research. And one of the ways that they're doing this is through generating synthetic data sets, whether that's in the clinical trial space, so running in silico trials, whether it's producing data sets around a very specific, deep disease, so that you can understand the nature of the disease. So if you think of it, for example, you take a hospital record, you get demographics, diagnosis, procedure, prescription, outcome if you're really lucky. By using synthetic data, you can actually go electronic health record, clinical vital signs, prescription data, images, scans, genomic, all at the single at the patient level, where you couldn't do that with real-world data because you risk, I guess, the wrath of the information governance team as you try to access this. So what I see is that synthetic data, this really deep, clinically deep, granular synthetic data, has greater value than potentially the real-world data on which it was based.
Claire, do you have a view on that?
No, I'm just fascinated. I think I'm not a privacy lawyer, but I think I often find that I'm running to our GDPR team and talking about things. So I think that's something I'm definitely going to talk about when I get back to the office. But I think obviously GDPR and all the privacy constraints are there for good reason and to protect the patients. But it's a nightmare to navigate from doing deals and to trying to do these collaborations to work out how everyone can do these in a compliant way.
Yeah. Let me just, because I know we don't have a huge amount of time, maybe no time, I'd like to just bring the subject over to AI as a product. Now, we know there are lots of products that are being developed by Google Health that are basically diagnostics. But there have been some recent announcements regarding potential products that could come out, and one of them you may have seen in the Financial Times concerns a company called Isomorphic, which is a spin-out of DeepMind. They're not far from here, in case you want to go visit. But apparently they don't. They don't want to see you. It's still very secretive. But according to the interview they had with the Financial Times, they're working on novel proteins. These would be proteins not found in nature, so synthetic proteins, which could then be the basis of drugs. Does this sound at all plausible to you, or does it sound fantastical?
I think given the enormity of Google and the resources, obviously, we've already talked about, the more resources you have and the more that you can buy data in, obviously you can do an awful lot with it. I think that they will, obviously they're behind AlphaFold and DeepMind, so I think they are showing that you can achieve things that maybe had been impossible. I think it would, I think this is watch this space. And see how much data they swallow up, as well as potentially
yes,
companies.
Exactly. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Probably, I hope. So.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting, and I really appreciated the discussion on the different sources of data and being imaginative as to where they could come from. I think one of the areas of data which is perhaps an untapped source is that from kind of wearables and health monitoring, looking at things through the lens of what happens when biology goes right, as opposed to what happens when biology goes wrong, and only looking at patients. So just one, because that could then inform you as to how nature naturally combats disease or prevents it, or the mechanisms at play that can help inform our choices in terms of mechanism of action or target choices. So at what point could we integrate health data, what it means to be properly well, from the likes of wearables into these AI platforms?
Sorry, the rate determining step on that one is the owners of the data giving it away and making it available. Apple are not going to give away their data that they get from the watches to anyone else. Fitbit aren't. So it has the potential to be amazing, but again, coming down to the adage of how do you access the data, how do you curate it, and how do you get it into your own systems? And that's the whole sticking point of all of this.
It goes back to Nick's comment in the earlier panel session as well about at what point we're going to start sharing things. And the title in front of us there is, sharing in a converging world. And these sorts of technologies are converging, but we're not sharing that data, not finding a way to do it. And perhaps on an individual level, people would be happy to donate their data, but of course it goes through these commercial third parties.
So coming back to 23andMe, when they did the deal with GSK, that was all people just saying, yes, you can have my data. They either didn't tick the box or did tick the box. So I think individuals are willing to give their data more than we think, but corporations aren't.
And I think we are seeing examples of, certain patient communities becoming tokenized. So
Tokenized.
certain rare disease populations are starting to create communities on a platform where those patients are rewarded for donating their data, whether that's wearable data, daily reporting of pain scores in certain indications. But the patients are then rewarded, for example, with that sort of continuing engagement with the platform, whereby, for example, they get weekends away, ultimately after a year or so they get a holiday. But then what you actually have is you have a patient population of data, so they allow their medical records to be used. You're getting the patient-reported data in, both the events and the outcomes, because more often than not, you don't get the outcomes data as to how people are feeling after treatment. And I think this is possibly one of the ways that will go, and this company is certainly in rare diseases and is looking to branch out into other disease areas where ultimately you tokenize, or patients tokenize their own data.
So to incentivize groups of particularly healthy or resilient people.
And I think in the
I
future,
think we
you'll
have
see
to,
those-
yeah. Peter.
Yeah, maybe so just one more thing about the wearables data, because we were involved in many of the sensor and algorithm developments. Just a lot of it is just not up to medical snuff. It's just not good enough. And because don't forget, these things were developed to convince consumers to buy these. And that's a different kind of data from what you would expect from a medical source. So there is improvement, but we've got to be very careful about curating which data you're going to use and which not, because again, you don't want to build models based on noise instead of real measurements.
And one final point, also once data is integrated and models have been trained, if there's a choice that you have the option to withdraw your data, that once algorithms have been trained, you can't do that. You can't untrain an algorithm. So I think that's the sort of other challenge that you have around data and how you use it.
Good, okay, so we're over time, and Tony will give us the final.
I'd like to thank Victoria and the panel. I think it's been a great discussion.